Hello and welcome to another lecture for History of Journalism. This one is about Jacob Riis, an important reporter and photographer and investigator in the early 1900s in New York City. A little bit of background: he was born in Denmark as the third of 15 children, and he arrived in the United States in 1870. He couldn't find work, and he was often forced to spend the night in lodging houses or, you know, really bad uh, one-room facilities which had several people living there. And he did a variety of menial jobs before he found work in 1873 for New York news organizations. And the basis of his staying in these bad lodging houses provided information and his interest in the living conditions of his fellow human beings. In 1877, Riis became a police reporter for the New York Tribune, but he was determined to use his journalistic skills to write about poverty. He constantly argued that the poor were the victims rather than the makers of their fate. And in 1888, Riis worked as a photojournalist for the New York Evening Sun. And he was among the first photographers to use flash powder, which enabled him to photograph interiors and exteriors of the slums at night. He also became associated with what later became known as muckraking journalism. In December 1889, an account of city life, which included his photographs, appeared in Scribner's magazine. And the article created a great deal of interest, and the next year a full-length version, How the Other Half Lives, was published, and we'll be reading excerpts from that piece. Theodore Roosevelt, the New York police commissioner at the time, had the city police look at the lodging houses that were featured in the book and close them down. Now, there's an important thing to keep in mind with reading How the Other Half Lives. History is meant to look at journalism in what's appreciated and what can be said at that time in history. It's a mistake to take what we know now and apply those morals to what was written about 100 years ago. So what you'll find in Riis's material are some words that we wouldn't use for Italians and Jews today. But the sensibilities back then were not our sensibilities of today. And so I just want you to keep in mind to don't get put off by some words that you might find offensive, that you will find offensive actually, when in fact at the time they were not intended to be offensive. So just keep that in mind, and don't get too caught up in those words, but look at the broader picture of what Riis was trying to do. So over the next 25 years, Riis wrote and lectured on problems of the poor, and he created over a dozen books, including his photographs, Children of the Poor, Out of Mulberry Street, The Battle with the Slum, and Children of the Tenement. And his work and his efforts were critical in terms of cleaning up the slums that existed on the south side of New York, near the Bowery, which is near New York University, Chinatown, which today are some of the highest rents and costs in all of New York City. Doesn't mean that the problems of slums have gone away, but he did a great deal of work by exposing the problems. And he died in 1914 in Massachusetts. So Jacob Riis, an interesting character to say the least, and that's what we have today. So thanks very much, and we'll see you online.